The reef sang warnings in colors, stripes of cobalt, saffron, and pearl racing along living corals as three skiffs knifed through the shallows, engines howling. On the foremost skiff, a mercenary in red composite armor raised a launcher and sighted the smallest target on the lagoon, a woven coracle carrying a human child and something luminous clinging beneath the waterline. "Lock," he muttered. The launcher's tone flattened into a kill note. A second later, a blue-white flare streaked down from orbit, punched into the water 50 meters ahead, and blossomed into a thundercloud of glittering frost. The skiff hit the saltice plume and lurched. Its sensors went blind, its intake coughed. The mercenary cursed. From the belly of the cutter UNS Marigold, Commander Jonah Hale watched the mess he'd made with a grim sort of satisfaction. "Chaff bombs in the surf lanes," he said. "Old fisherman trick. You snow the thermals, you snow the shooters." "Aye," said his sensor chief. "Thermal clutter at 100%, their scopes are soup." On Hale's forward screen, the coracle bobbed like a comma in a sentence that might end in blood. The child, 6, maybe 7, curled her small body over the luminous animal beneath her. The creature looked like a ribboned manta crossed with a kite, its membrane pulsing light in patterns that felt like song more than color. "Karu," whispered Lieutenant Mintre. "Wave singers, locals say they write the water." Another skiff spat tracer into the glare, bullets scythed spray. The child flinched. The Karu flared a shield of violet along its dorsal ridge, taking the rounds with a crackle like rain on tin. Hale toggled shipwide. "Weapons, safety's off, but we're playing by just war rules. Proportional response, no fire into civilian water. Net them, don't kill them." He'd grown up with a Dunkirk poster above his bed. The little boats, black smoke on the horizon, stubborn hope surviving artillery. He'd learned early that strategy wasn't only about force. It was about what you refused to become. "Launch the weirs," he ordered. The Marigold's belly spat a fan of collapsible smart boys that splashed and unfurled into a lattice of tensioned lines just beneath the surface. An instant fishing weir scaled for speedboats. The lead skiff hit it at 40 knots. Cables screamed, bow buried, and the entire boat pivoted harmless into a half-circle that dumped its crew into waist-deep surf. "Security teams go," Hale said. Oars and blankets, not rifles, were on camera. He could feel the moral lens of the galaxy. Every system had a pirate stream. Every stream had a comment section ready to damn you. More importantly, a child was watching. "Sir," Min said, voice tight. "2 more skiffs incoming. The third is lining up on the coracle." Hale breathed in through his nose. "Helm, give me a block. Put us between the shooter and that boat. If they want the child, they shoot through steel and law." "Sir, that risks." "That's the point." The Marigold rolled, dropping a shoulder to slide its armored midships directly into the line of fire. Slugs hammered her plating. The noise came up through Hale's boots. He tasted metal. The coracle vanished briefly in the ship's shadow, then popped out again, bumping against Marigold's fender bladders. A deckhand with arms like bridge cables reached down with a foam sling and hauled the child up, Karu and all, in one trembling, miraculous scoop. The Karu clung, membranes ringing with panic yellow. The child coughed surf, blinked salt from her lashes, and croaked, "Don't hurt them, please." Hale crouched. Up close, the Karu's patterns weren't random. They were grammar, call and response in light. The creature flashed a braid of sea green and silver that felt like gratitude, or he was anthropomorphizing. Either way, the child's small hand rested on the animal's ridge as if on a sibling's shoulder. "We aren't here to hurt anyone," he said, truth as order. "We're here to stop the hurting." On the water, the last skiff slewed to a halt. Its pilot lifted both hands. Hale's security team moved in with inflatable shields, no muzzles, all caution. One mercenary swung a club anyway. Mintran slid down a rappel, parried with a board like an Aikido teacher in a wetsuit, and swept his legs, clean, non-lethal, on feeds around the planet. "Broadcast," Hale said. "Open band, say it plain." Min's voice went out over the surf. "UN Colonial Cutter Marigold to Redline Extractors. Your contract is void under Planetary Ethics Code. Non-combatant sanctuary zones are in force. Disengage and you will be processed under humane maritime law." Overhead, clouds drew a curtain over the sun. The reef answered with light, long chords rippling down the living walls. The Karu responded, singing in color. The child's throat worked, and a soft whistle came out, almost matching the pulse. Min glanced at Hale. Commander, she's echoing. Hale remembered the Navajo code talkers, people who took what they had and turned it into an unbreakable edge. Human history bent that way when it was at its best, make family out of strangers and signal right under the enemy's nose. Record everything, he said, and be respectful, we're guests. A shadow fell across the lagoon, the kind of shadow you feel in your molars. Min's console chimed alarm. Dropping in from high orbit, corporate gunship, they brought friends. On the deck, the Karu stiffened. It pulsed a pattern Hale hadn't seen before, deep indigo, then stark white like surf over midnight. The child saw it too and translated without language. "They're saying run," she whispered. The creature turned toward the water, then back to the child, then to Hale, membranes flickering with a frantic braid of color he could almost read as a question. He stood and tapped the rail. "We don't run from people who hunt children," he said, to his crew, to the cameras, to the reef. "We draw a circle." "Sir?" Min asked. "A line keeps others out, a circle brings others in. Call the nearest cutters, the Oceanic Patrol, the volunteer sailfoils. Tell them we're making a harbor." The gunship's silhouette grew teeth, missiles budded like wasps. Hale set his jaw. "Also, tell Earth that the Karu just protected one of ours, and tell Earth to be Earth." The first missile peeled off its pylon. "Countermeasures hot," Min said. "Hold," Hale answered, eyes on the child, on the luminous being pressed against her side. "We do this our way." The missile burned toward them and the reef sang louder. They named her later Ari Navarro, 6 years and a handful of months, daughter of a shipfitter and a botanist who'd come to Vespra to mend boats and catalog tide orchids. In the hours after the lagoon fight, Ari fell asleep with a blanket around her shoulders and her cheek against the Karu's cool membrane. The creature's colors slowed to a lullaby. Hale gave his report by standing at the bow with the wind in his hair while 1,000 feeds stole his image. He told the truth plainly. Mercenaries hired to harass coastal communities into signing extraction agreements. A child saved by a local sentient. A naval cutter that blocked bullets with its body. The images told the rest. Foam slings, boards as shields, no muzzle flashes. By nightfall, the Marigold's rescue trended across Sol Net. By morning, the video had reached kitchen tables from Kansas City to Nairobi to lunar domes where sunrise was a switch. It is hard to argue against a small human hand on an alien shoulder. Within a week, Earth convened an emergency session. The United Nations chamber had always been too small for history and too big for comfort. That day it held both. Delegates wore the faces of people braced to choose who they were. Dr. Zara Osai, xenologist, grandmother, moral barometer, held up a still of Ari and the Karu. "They protected our child, not because we could pay, because it was right." Opposite her, a corporate bloc in sober suits murmured about precedent and expense. Representative Havel from the outer systems warned of pirates, of stretched patrol lines, of the danger in promising more than you can deliver. Ari stood on a footstool at a podium that had held heads of state. Her voice wobbled once and then found its center. "They sang me safe," she said. "Please sing back." Beside her, Min translated the Karu's color phrases into sound and then into speech. The Karu say, "A tide lifts all boats. A harbor is built so little boats don't break." Hale watched from the gallery with a sailor's superstition that if he looked away, the moment would slip. He remembered stoic lines his mother had taped to a fridge. "You don't control the storm, only the helm." He had controlled what he could, his rules of engagement, his posture, his refusal to shoot first. Now it was other people's turn to steer. The vote that followed was messy, like all good things born in public. But when the board lit green and the chamber filled with the sound of palms striking desks, the announcer's words reached the Marigold at anchor half a world away. "By overwhelming majority, the General Assembly adopts the Guardian Accord. The Karu of Vespera are declared a protected people. Any hostile act against them shall be considered a hostile act against humanity." The reef answered that with light like sunrise from below. Protection changed everything and nothing. Everything, because human ships now orbited Vespera in watchful patterns and contracts written in private offices shattered on the floor like cheap glass. Nothing, because the ocean still had moods and people still had greed. Ari went back to school in a floating classroom that smelled like brine and pencil shavings. She learned to read the Karu's light song faster than Min did. The Karu learned to read human faces until a twitch of a lip could mean joke or storm. Ari's Karu took the name Tide That Listens in a braid of colors that children rendered as tide in their chalk. Hale's crew taught the coastal villages how to rig emergency beacons, how to layer signal mirrors into art so that a skyward flash could be both pretty and a call for help. The Karu taught sailors to feel the pressure of a coming squall in their teeth. Exchange like that builds nations. A year later, the Dominion arrived. They didn't come with skulls painted on hulls or overt threats. They came with claims, salvage rights over abandoned industrial platforms, navigation drills within international norms, mineral surveys purely informational. Their destroyers cruised the line outside the protection zone like sharks arguing maritime law. Probe, Min said, watching contrails stitch the sky. If they find seam, they pry. Then we don't give them one, Hale said. He thought of Midway, how a single choice, turning decks at the wrong minute, radioing at the right, tilts history. He set patrols to fly patterns that looked lazy but weren't, kept weapons cold but ready, trained boarding teams to go first with words. The Dominion pilots buzzed reef villages anyway. A sonic boom cracked bowls in a market. Tide That Listens flared alarm orange and dove, her membrane fusing with water like ink in a brush. A novice Karu, young as Ari, tried to imitate the move and misjudged the boat's keel. The thud went through the village like a dropped pan. Ari screamed. By the time Hale sprinted down the pier, Tide had wrapped the youngster in cooling violet, but blood like green smoke leaked into the water. Medical! Hale roared, and then quieter, to the sky, to the destroyers that pretended they hadn't seen. We are patient by choice, not because we are blind. The Dominion claimed training accident. They demanded compensation for a lost drone that had clipped a mast. They filed a grievance with a court that had never tasted salt. That night in the schoolboat's hall where nets hung like drapes, Hale stood before fishermen, elders, engineers, and kids with their feet not quite touching the floor. He drew a circle on a chalkboard. Lines keep people out, he said. A circle brings people in. We brought the Karu in. They brought us in. That's what scares bullies. Min added a map, pins like constellations. Sympathetic worlds, minor polities tired of being stepped on, stations with too many widows. If the accord is more than a flag, we make it a family, he said. A circle of harbors. Ari raised her hand. Can Tide talk to the other oceans? She asked. Tide pulsed a run of colors that Min had learned to read, yes, but slower than ships. Then we go to them, Hale said. In person. He scheduled circuits that tasted like the old civil rights freedom rides. Show up, sing together, make it harder to ignore a town when it knows its neighbors. He sent packets of law translated into funny pictures. He sent engineers with wrenches and hot coffee. The Dominion noticed. They always do. 2 months into the circuits, 3 of their frigates ghosted into Vespera space behind a shield of legalese and polite malice. They parked beyond the reef and turned outward sensors inward. The message was as clear as a fist laid gently on a table. Hale's comm chimed. The Dominion Admiral's voice was velvet with knives. Commander Hale, we note your circle. Kindly avoid interfering with lawful surveys. It would be a shame if training accidents continued. Hale stood on his deck with Ari and Tide beside him. He rested a hand on steel and thought of Marcus Aurelius. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. We don't do shame, he said. We do harbors. Through the steel, through the wind, through the glow that ran the length of Tide's body, the lagoon answered. It felt like the pause before a bell. The first time the Karu sang into human radios, the ocean turned every antenna into a throat. It was Min's idea, borrowed in spirit from the Navajo code talkers who had once bent language into a shield. Human compressors couldn't carry the Karu's full spectrum, but they could pulse 3 colors at once and map them to triads that meant verbs, currents, and careful, there's grief ahead. Within a month, patrol chatter across the circle of harbors sounded like a choir heard through rain. Amber pearl slate near Beacon 6 meant tow line. Indigo gold white meant family aboard. Coral 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 meant stop now, you're about to make a mistake. The Dominion frigates learned none of it. They thought strength meant speaking louder. When they finally pushed into the protection zone, they did it sideways. A humanitarian inspection of a Karu spawning ground, cameras rolling, drones buzzing like flies. Dominion Marines dropped in glossy pods, visors mirrored. They marched like men who assumed their boots would never slip. They slipped. Fisher skiffs and sail foils, grandmothers with bracelets jangling, teenagers with sunburned noses, carpenters who could splice a rope in their sleep, rose from coves and cuts like a flock. It was Dunkirk with brighter paint. The Karu slid beneath hulls, pushing currents to cheat the wind in favor of outrun boats. Min's triads poured over the net. The ocean itself became a scheduler, routing traffic around choke points. Hale stood on the Marigold's bridge, jaw tight. Rules of engagement hold, he said. We disable, we don't humiliate, we don't make orphans. Sir, the tactical officer said, their lead frigate just launched a boarding torpedo at the schoolboat, hostages aboard. Hale tasted tin. Course to intercept, nets and foam. He thought of just war theory, discrimination, proportionality, and of civil rights logistics. How you built a march so that the water stations didn't run dry. War and logistics were cousins in uncomfortable suits. Both broke when you got lazy. Marigold's launch hit the torpedo's path at a slant. The pilot popped the canopy at the last second and threw a foam charge that blossomed into a sticky white flower. The torpedo thudded and stuck. Kids on the schoolboat cheered like it was recess. Sir, Min said softly, we've got a signal on private band. It's not Dominion, it's Karu, but wrong. Wrong meant dark. On Hale's aux screen, a Karu appeared, membrane tinted like oil, patterns inverted. Its light wrote in harsh, efficient glyphs, weakness kills, strength protects those who submit. Min's mouth flattened. He calls himself Ebad Edge, says he left the reefs years ago, says the Dominion offers safety without pretense. Ari stood on tiptoe to see. Tide That Listens shivered, then wrote a coil of old song Hale had come to know as mourning. Ari translated the way only a child could. He was hurt. He thinks being kind got him hurt, so he's trying to be something else. Hale nodded once. We keep the channel open. Nobody is our enemy forever. The battle for the spawning ground looked strange on paper. The circle swarmed with boats too small to bother a war college and embarrassed 3 frigates into retreat without a kill tally. Hale ordered every disabling shot to land on engines and rudders. He ordered loudhailers to carry apologies when a drone's carcass crushed a stand of Tide orchids. Cost came anyway. It always does. A tug named Kettle Jane, older than some of the elders, took a glancing beam to her stack while pulling a sloop out of a bad angle. The crew got off, but she burned to her waterline and went down making a sound like a kitchen crying. The village that had shared her wore black ropes for a week. That night, the sky over Vespera sewed itself with stars and the circle held a vigil on the beach. The Karu drew slow light across the shallows. Human voices sang a hymn none of them had known they knew until they needed it. Hale talked briefly about proportionality, not as math but as mercy, as a way to keep from becoming the thing you fight. He quoted a 3-line note from a Marine in the Pacific, we will win. Then we must deserve it. He didn't name the wars. He didn't have to. On the reef's edge, Ebad Edge hovered alone in black water, pulsing a credo he had borrowed from people who would break him when he ceased to be useful. Tide answered him with the song of the lost shoal, an invitation written in patient light. It did not shame. It did not plead. It said, you can come home. The next morning, the Dominion sent a formal delegation to negotiate deconfliction. They chose the Academy's hall, where nets still hung and chalk dust still lived in the air. Admiral Sorev of the Dominion smiled the way a trap does. Commander Hale, he said, Would you prefer we address the child or the pet? Ari didn't shrink. Tide pulsed silver gold, family steady. Hale kept his hands on the table where everyone could see them. You may address the ambassador, he said, nodding to a row of elders, to a row of teenage fishers, to a line of Karu whose membranes shone like stained glass. All of them. Very touching, Sorev said. But law is law. We observe freedom of navigation. You observe, Hale said, what we are willing to tolerate. Outside, the ocean went quiet in that big way that means a weather change you can feel in your bones. The hall's windows dimmed as clouds shouldered in. Min's calm spat triads that made everyone look up. White indigo, fleet, many. Sorev didn't bother to hide his smile. You drew your circle, he said. Let us see if it holds. They called it the Battle of Singing Reefs mostly because the name felt kinder than what any battle should be called. 57 Dominion hulls slid into Vespera space in ranks like piano keys. Destroyers with shark mouth intakes, cruisers that wore their missile cells like jewelry. The circle answered with chaos made disciplined. 200 vessels that shouldn't have been able to stand together but did. Cutters, Coast Guard tins, sail foils, caravan barges with repurposed field emitters, and a handful of loaned cruisers from allies who liked the idea of harbors. Hale didn't match line with line. He drew a lattice. Engineers sank mirror panels into the thermocline so that sonar bent like light. Karu teams swam braided paths that laid chaff where current would keep it. Min's triads shifted from talk to dance, every phrase a vector and a promise. Target sets, Hale said. Weapons, you know the rules. Engines, turrets, arrays. No kill shots unless it's that or a child's grave. Sir, his tactical chief said, this will take longer. It's supposed to, Hale said. Speed is how bullies win arguments. First contact looked like a mistake. Dominion missiles died fizzing in water so cold it cracked their guidance. A cruiser fired blind at a phantom reef and hit her own decoys. A destroyer plowed straight into a patch of ocean that wasn't where the charts said it would be and found herself in a snare of anchored lines that wrapped her screw like a spider's gift. Min's voice threaded calm through the net. Amber slate gold, convoy delta, you're hot, turn 30, coral pearl, launch nets. Indigo white, evac corridor 3. In the Academy's command room, Ari watched with her hands flat on the glass as if she could hold the ocean steady. Tide hovered beside her, writing triads for Min when the rhythm of battle bent human tongues. The room smelled like coffee gone cold and rain in wool. A Dominion cruiser finally got a clean line on the Marigold. The beam lit Hale's bridge in a cinematographer's dream and a mother's nightmare. The deck shook. Paint burned. Someone laughed because that's what fright sounds like when it refuses to be tears. Return, Hale said, with restraint. Marigold's coil gun spat slugs into the cruiser's starboard engine cluster. The big ship shuddered and swung wide, drifting. On every camera it looked like Mercy because it was, and because Mercy was one more thing to weaponize in the open. Sir, Min said, voice low, we've got defectors. It started with one, Dominion Squadron 2's commander, an old reptilian with scars like tree rings, broadcasting on open. To any who will hear, the enemy has us and does not kill us. That is a strength we do not know. Others followed with smaller surrenders, guns powered down, flags inverted, engines cut. The Dominion admiral screamed orders that nobody obeyed fast enough. In dark water at the edge of radar, Ebad Edge hung between tides. He pulsed a jagged thought, take the gap, strike the schoolboat, and then felt Tide's song pierce through every word. It wasn't argument, it was memory. It was a small human hand on a luminous back, a cutter turning its hull into a shield, a village singing for a tugboat that died doing her job. Ebb wrote grief, then apology, then hesitantly home. Tide answered with a chord that meant a door standing open. Ari translated it aloud because she could not help being a bridge. We don't make you small to make us big, she said. You can be you and still be ours. Hale took one breath and another. Broadcast to all Dominion, he said, wideband and recorded, put it in 100 languages, put it in color, put it in song. He spoke to lenses and to the quiet muscle of the world. Your fleet is defeated. You are not destroyed. That difference is our choice. We fight to make harbors. We will not sink you to prove we can. The Dominion admiral sputtered about law and weakness and inevitability. But inevitability had just changed definition. In homes where dinner waited and screens glowed, people who had never seen Vespra tasted salt behind their tongues and decided that this was a story they wanted to claim. By dusk, wrecking crews in orange vests worked alongside captured Dominion sailors to tow wounded hulls away from fragile reefs. Kids in bright life vests handed out bread. A grandmother flicked a spoon at a lieutenant who tried to refuse soup. "Sit," she said. He sat. In the hall that had hosted arguments and equations, the elders and fishermen and students gathered chalk dust into their palms and pressed handprints on a wall. Karu flickered their light in answer, each membrane print a promise. Min wrote dates, Ari wrote names. Hale drew a circle around them all. On a private channel that wasn't truly private, Ebarej said, "I am tired of being unkind." Tide wrote back, "The tide turns." It is the oldest sentence in any ocean. The next morning, the communique that would be called the Harbor Accords began with 10 words. "We are strongest when our strength is used for shelter." It spread like a weather front, over harbors and deserts and sky farms, into places that had only ever known the word protection as something the powerful said as they took. Hale slept at last, sitting up in a chair, boots off, head tipped back. He dreamed he was 17, reading about Midway and thinking that brilliance had to be loud. He woke understanding that sometimes the cleverest tactic was to be stubbornly, conspicuously decent. Outside, the reef sang low. The ocean exhaled. The circle held for now. By dawn, the reef wore ribbons of lanterns, glass floats salvaged from old longlines, each with a diode, each with a Karu knot that let light answer light. Kids called them stars you can hold. Engineers called them a sensor mesh. Either way, the lagoon breathed easier with 1,000 patient eyes. After the Harbor Accords, paperwork hit like a squall. Defected crews needed processing, damaged hulls needed towing, sovereignty maps needed redrawing with pencil instead of gunfire. Mercy makes work. Hale slept 4 hours in 2 days, boots under his chair, a mug that tasted like machine oil instead of coffee. When he could, he walked the pier with Ari and Tide, letting the ordinary seawater astringe the adrenaline out of him. A memorial for Kettle Jane drew the whole island. The Karu made a slow aurora along the beach, a moving boulevard of gold and rain blue. Someone read the names of the tug's crew. A fisherman with more years on the water than the island had paved roads said, "We didn't fight to look brave, we fought to come home." Ari held Tide's fin and said nothing, which was its own kind of eloquence. Politics broke the quiet. A packet from Earth brought gnats that bit deeper than bullets. Think pieces about overreach. Hearings about budget discipline. Lobbyists warning that declaring every gentle species protected would open the floodgates. Hale didn't envy the committee chairs. He also didn't flinch from the principle. Virtue ethics, he reminded himself, wasn't a parlor trick. It was the work of becoming the kind of people who could live with themselves when the cameras turned off. The Dominion changed tactics. They hired cutouts, syndicate trawlers with registry numbers that dissolved when you chased them, to harvest Karu egg clusters. They salted channels with polymer film that slicked the water like a lie. 3 nests spoiled before the circle even knew there was a new war underway. Min's answer was patient mischief. He and the dock kids built bubble curtains that turned cloaks visible, like rain exposing invisible ink. He taught the schoolboat to broadcast triads on low-frequency pings that made syndicate sonar useless. Midway turned on a code book, he told Ari, writing on a whiteboard. "So will this. Feed the ocean the right syllables and it tells the truth." Ebarej hovered at the thermocline, torn between old pain and the door Tide kept propped open with songs heavy as home. He finally contacted Min in a jittery braid of color, sending coordinates, times, and phrases that translated as Gray Harvest, Night, Ice Trawlers, sorry. Trap, Min asked Hale. Risk, Hale said. Bring blankets and cuffs. The night of the raid smelled like rain and hot metal. The circle went out dark, sail foils with their masts wrapped in soot to kill the glare, cutters with their running lights hooded, Karu weaving through prop wash leaving only a soft bruise of light. The trawlers slid toward the nests with nets already lifting. Min keyed the curtains. A seam of bubbles rose like a wall, the trawlers' cloaks warped, then failed. Floods popped on with a panicked brightness. Fisher skiffs that had crept along like ghosts suddenly became a city. Kids in life vests slung lines with a competence that made their parents swear softly with pride. Ari took station on the schoolboat's bow, tide pressed against the hull, lending muscle to the hull's turn like a second rudder grown from light. When a trawler's winch screamed and a sling full of eggs swung, she pointed, and every skiff with reachers and poles swung back. Eggs slid into slings of kelp and careful hands. One syndicate captain pulled a pistol. Ari saw the gun before the adults did. She didn't freeze. She whistled 3 notes Tide knew meant shot hurts, and Tide flared a shield of violet. The bullet flattened and dropped into the foam like an idea that had lost its argument. Security was there a breath later, boards up, cuffs out, nobody dead. Another cost arrived anyway because cost keeps appointments. A skiff named Holiday Joy took a glancing blow from a trawler's bow. Her skipper's leg snapped on the gunwale. The boy at the tiller, 15, freckles like spilled cinnamon, kept the boat between the trawler and a nest while he shouted through his teeth for help. Sitrep, Hale snapped. Min answered with triads that meant pain and holding and proud. Hale gripped the rail until his knuckles blanched. We owe these kids a world where this isn't necessary, he said to no one and to everyone. By dawn, the gray harvest lay in pieces along the beach, their winches silent, their manifests on Min's tablet, their crew in custody. The nests that had almost gone empty glowed like sunrise folded into jelly. The island slept hard for 4 hours. Then politics woke up again, worse. The Dominion filed an injunction with the Galactic Commerce Court. Their argument was laced with politis and threat. That the harbor accords represented an unlawful restraint of trade. That Vespera's protection zone was an impermissible barrier to freedom of navigation. That cooperation between humans and Karu constituted an unfair monopoly on maritime services. It was breathtaking and predictable. Courts can be Midway or quagmire, Min said, holding the notice like it smelled bad. Depends how bravely you tell the story. Hale packed a uniform and a single photograph, Kettle Jane's crew laughing, oil on their faces. Ari packed a notebook with Karu grammar and a seashell. Tide packed nothing because the ocean travels light. Ebadej met them at the cove at dusk, wrote home, timidly, and then brightened when Ari nodded. Stoic advice, Hale thought as the shuttle climbed. Focus on the helm, not the storm. He looked down at the reef's soft glow and promised it he'd steer. The court orbited a gas giant so fat with whether it made you believe in gods. The station's windows framed storms sliding under storms, bands braided like rope. It was an odd place to argue about oceans, but maybe it made sense to hold law over something too big to own. The hearing chamber had the soft lighting of a place where people hoped ideas would sit down and talk. Delegates from systems Hale had only read about watched from galleries, debrief briefs on their laps like prayer books. The Dominions advocate war calm like a scarf. We request only what law promises, open lanes, transparent rules, respect for commerce. She purred as if commerce had never worn a gun. Hale kept his remarks simple. The Karu are people, he said, gesturing not at Tide, but at the wall of recordings, eggs carried like treasure, lanterns answering lanterns, Ari's hand resting on Tide's fin. They protected a child when we failed to be there. The harbor accords codify a duty that predates law, to draw a circle around those who cannot draw it for themselves. We restrain force not to look noble, but to keep the world from breaking in our hands. He name-checked the Berlin airlift, planes full of flour flying into winter, the Selma logistics, who brought the sandwiches and the ponchos. The Navy's tradition of assisting ships in distress regardless of flag. Our strength is real. What matters is how we point it. Ari took the stand on tiptoe, Tide hovering in the well, light writing slow honey syllables that Min translated into tone and then into language. Ari asked the court to watch, not just to hear. Tide narrated a memory of the lagoon as color and pulse. The court's translators tried, failed, and then did something rare. They admitted the translation was missing the soul. People leaned forward anyway. Tears are a kind of fluency. Ebad Edge's testimony broke the room. He described how pain had taught him the wrong lesson and how a human circle had untaught it with patience instead of punishment. I believed strength meant not needing anyone. He pulsed, Min's voice laying the triads like stones across a river. Then I watched a tug that could have fled towing. I am tired of being unkind. The Dominion advocate tried to reframe. Moving, she said, as if complimenting a school play. But law. A siren cut her off. The clerk's console filled with red. Min's ear beads spat triads like thrown gravel. White indigo, he signed, then looked up. Incoming kinetic rod, he translated. Origin unknown, vector Vespera. Hale didn't ask permission, he moved. We need a ship, he told the court. Now, he didn't say please, the presiding judge didn't scold him for it. Dock 12, she snapped. Pilot's chair is yours if you can take it. She looked at the Dominion table. And if anyone here thinks to object on procedural grounds while a world is in danger, I advise them to remember the cameras. The station's loaner was a stubby rescue craft with a coil gun big for its bones. Min slid into nav like the chair had been waiting for him. Tide filled the cabin with sea glow. Even in vacuum, her light felt like wind across a bay. Ebb anchored himself to a handhold with a strip of cloth Ari tied with hands that shook once and then steadied. The rod was exactly what you use if you want denial and devastation. A tungsten telephone pole slung from far enough away that fingerprints smudged. It would hit like a small god, vaporize reefs, boil nurseries into sterile glass. We can't blow it, Min said. Shards still shred, we need to soften it. Net it, Hale said, and Min grinned like a kid presented with a righteous dare. They stole a trick from offshore riggers and ice pilots. Cargo drones dove, spooling bundles of aerogel filament. The rescue craft fired sabots that burst into clouds of ceramic dust. Together they made a net in nothing, a spiderweb everything falls through slow. Angle, Min asked, eyes gone distant in the math. Give me 5 degrees and faith. Faith I have, Hale said and rolled the ship. At contact, the rod lit like a match head. Ceramic dust flashed, the aerogel went taut, the rod's skin ablated into a cup of plasma. It still came, a fist in slow motion. The net sagged, lines singing. Tide wrote a triad Hale didn't know but felt in his teeth, push. Ebb, tentative, added a counter triad, hold. The rescue craft burned thrusters sideways, turning catastrophic into painfully survivable. The rod hit high atmosphere, already ragged and slowed, still a bruise, not a death. Comms lit with every voice Vespera owned. The circle had seconds to move children and eggs from the projected splash. They did it because they had practiced doing it in smaller hurts, and because practice is how you make luck. When the rod finally kissed ocean, it punched a hole and threw a ring. Boats in the ring rode it like broncos. 2 capsized and were righted. Ari felt her stomach twist and clenched her jaw and watched Tide's light for steadiness the way some kids watch their dad's face. Back in the court, the presiding judge stared at the feed where human Karu and a defected Dominion commander had just kept a planet from breaking. She lifted the gavel like it weighed half her heart. The harbor accords stand, she said, voice steady. They are binding as a matter of law and of civilization. Freedom of navigation does not include the freedom to drown each other's children. Petition denied. Hale didn't cheer. He sat very still, hands on his knees, and let relief hurt like a thaw. Ari put her forehead to Tide's fin. Ebb flashed a single note of gold and blue. Home. And then shyly brightened. The legal win birthed a backlash. It always does when a story shifts from what if to we will. The Dominion purged officers who had surrendered with decency in their eyes. A splinter of syndicates nursing pride and invoices declared they would teach the Circle respect. On Earth, a thin sliver of talking heads tried to relabel mercy as weakness. They were loud for a week, then footage of the Rod intercept drowned them in their own comment sections. The Circle grew anyhow. A convoy from the Alari, tree people with ships grown from silverwood, arrived with seedlings for windbreaks and a school of living boys that hummed counterpoints to Karu light. A mining town on a dusty moon sent crates of graphene cable with a note, "For nets. Pay us with songs when we visit." Someone painted a tug stack with the words Harbor Oath in block letters a child could read. Hale's crew built an academy on a rock that had once been nothing but birds and wind. Its main hall had a floor of sealed planks from ships that had earned their keep and retired with honor. The first unit on the syllabus wasn't weapons. It was logistics and care, 8 kinds of knot, triads for fog, the ethics of proportionality taught with a bowl and a jar of stones. A stoic maxim lived above the door: control your helm, share your harbor. A training cruise went wrong in the ordinary way that teaches you. A squall yawed in off the horizon like a bouncer, fast and mean. A sailfoil driven by a cadet who had only sailed on friendly seas got pinned beam on and rolled. Min's triads became monosyllables, now. Tide and ebb bracketed the hull, one reading the water's muscle, one reading the wind's temper. Ari reached for the cadet with a boat hook, missed, swore, reached again, got a fistful of jacket, and hauled. It didn't make headlines. It did make a sailor. Weeks later, the blow landed that felt like betrayal, even though everyone should have seen it coming. Admiral Sorev, the Dominion's velvet trap, reappeared over Vespero at the head of a lean task force with its transponders squeaky clean. He asked for a meeting without smirk. They met in the hall that smelled like sawdust and salt. Sorev brought a Karu with him, a dark membrane variant like Ebb had been, colors inverted, eyes hard. "This is Rift under glass," Sorev said. "He will tell you what happens to species that trust your circles." Rift pulsed a rehearsed cadence. Harvor is habit. Habit makes weak. Dominion brings order. Tide answered with the oldest song the Karu had, a lullaby that taught Fry to follow current home. Ari translated for those whose ears couldn't hear tenderness. Rift flickered once, almost like a flinch, then steeled himself back into the chalk outlines Sorev had drawn around him. "You didn't come to talk," Hale said. "Of course I did," Sorev said lightly. "But also to remind you that the galaxy is large, Commander. You cannot draw circles everywhere." Hale thought of the Birmingham Children's Crusade, kids in Sunday shoes facing hoses, and how the point had never been to fix everything at once. "We draw them where we stand," he said. "Then we stand somewhere else." Sorev's eyes went cold. "Then let us test how wide your arms open." His task force moved to intercept a convoy of refugee barges from a planet the Dominion had set on fire by proxy. The barges were slow and stubborn and filled with things that break if you drop them: children, old men, a library's worth of paper. Hale faced the choice that made careers and ended them: fire first and win the fight, or keep his own rules and risk a casualty. "We make a corridor," he said. "We do it with bodies and hulls." The circle assembled like a miracle practiced in advance. Tugs side by side made a wall. Sailfoils flew bright wings in the gaps. The Marigold and her sisters went bow on to the Dominion with guns cold and cameras hot. Min rode the net like a conductor, triads snicking into place. Tide and ebb pulsed patterns that turned surface chop into a moving sidewalk under the refugee barges. Sorev pushed until his bow kissed the corridor's edge. He stared through glass at Hale, 10 meters away across water as thin as a handshake. He waited for a flinch. Hale didn't give him one. He placed his palm on the rail where the cameras could see it. Sorev looked at Rift under glass as if the Karu might translate courage. Rift wrote nothing. The barges slipped through. Kids on the decks waved like the world was a parade. A librarian cried into the spine of a book. Sorev opened his mouth and closed it again, calculating the cost of ramming civilians on 1,000 screens. He backed water. It sounded like pain swallowed. That night, the Academy's mess hall served soup to refugee cooks who insisted on taking over the ladles. Someone taught someone else a card game. Someone else taught someone how to mend a net with fingers too soft for the work. Ari fell asleep on a bench, Tide's fin warm against her arm. Eb hovered in a doorway, unsure where to be, until Min patted the floor and said, "Here is fine." Eb settled like a question mark that had decided to be a period. A year later, the reef's lanterns still burned at night, but fewer of them were for emergency. Many were for habit and beauty. The Harbor Accords had expanded into the Alliance of Harbors, 37-member worlds and counting, each with its own stubborn stories and peculiar kindnesses. The flag wasn't a flag so much as a gesture, a circle made by two hands, one human, one not. Hale turned down a promotion that would have parked him behind a desk high enough to give him nosebleeds. "The work is here," he told the Admiralty. They made him an odd rank to keep him in place without insulting the brass. He taped a copy of the Berlin airlift schedule above his chart table as a reminder that logistics won quiet wars. Ari grew, because children do when you're not looking, into knees scabbed by good trouble and a voice that landed without apology. The Academy graduated its first class, a fisher who could route convoys by smell, a miner who sang triads better than Min, a bookish kid who wrote a Karu grammar that became a love letter to breathing things. Tide that listens earned Old Scar honor marks along her membrane. Ebadej lost the hyphens in his name the day he led a pod back from dark water without losing a single fry. Sorev fell not to a torpedo but to arithmetic. The Dominion's books couldn't balance fear against fuel. Defections spread, small and then less small. Rift under glass broke like a shell under a thoughtful boot. He came at dusk to the Academy's door and wrote to the floor. I was loud. "Can I be quiet here?" Tide answered with the door cord, and Ari put a blanket over him like a sister who refuses to keep score. The Harbor Accords weren't perfect. A pirate band with a sense of humor called themselves the Tugboat Menace and tried to steal a library barge. Kids with better humor stole their propellers while they slept. A storm unroofed half the Academy and taught the structural engineers humility. A town with bad water learned to love the taste of filters. Mercy kept requiring repairs. On the anniversary of the first battle, they dedicated the Kettle Jane Memorial, a bollard wrapped in rope, set in the sand where the tug had gone under, polished by hands. Hale spoke briefly. "Courage isn't the moment you take the hit," he said. "It's every small decision that made you the kind of person who takes it when it matters." Ari stood with Tide and Eb at the waterline. She remembered herself small, salt in her hair, the marigolds deck hard under her knees, the first time she understood that adults could be both scared and steady. She thought about just war, not as a Latin phrase, but as a pocket checklist. Who will this hurt? Can I do it with less hurt? Am I doing this to look righteous or to be useful? She wrote those questions on the Academy wall below the Stoic helm and the Harbor Oath. Students added their handprints until the wall looked like a coral head blooming. The last test came not with missiles, but with a plea. A rocky world no one had visited on purpose sent a thin band call. Ice storms, failed harvest, babies with ribs you could count. The Dominion offered relocation. It sounded like conquest with better lighting. The Alliance of Harbors offered an airlift. The convoy that formed didn't look like a fleet. It looked like a parade that had seen bad things and learned better songs. Cargo haulers took lead, hulls full of flour and filters. Reefers carried medical supplies like strawberries. A strange ship from the Alari with leaves instead of sails hummed a tune that softened turbulence. The marigold tucked in, old as an oath, new as tomorrow. They flew the Berlin schedule, slotted tight, no grandstanding. They landed, unloaded, drank hot broth, and lifted again. The Dominion patrol on the edge of the system watched, added numbers, and blinked. When an ice storm tore the schedule to shreds, the convoy didn't crack, it flexed. Tide and Eb riding in tanks that tasted like memory and forward motion, pulsed triads that let pilots share touch through clouds. The baby's ribs stopped counting like ticks. A town built a harbor out of containers. Someone wrote a lullaby by splicing a Karu chord into a human tune and forgot which species had started the melody. After the 8th run, Hale stood on a loading ramp with Min, legs heavy, eyes gritty, back full of the kind of ache that means you've spent yourself on purpose. Min handed him a mug. It was terrible coffee. It was perfect. "Remember the first day?" Min asked. "You said we draw a circle." Hale nodded, watching a line of kids in bright hats push wheelbarrows heavier than their arguments. "We did," he said. "Then we realized circles move." The convoy came home to Vespera under a sky with the right number of stars. The reef lit them like runway lights. The lanterns answered lanterns. Glass floats touched and chimed like gratitude you could hear. In the Academy Hall, where the floor smelled softly of salt and history, Ari read a proclamation on a piece of paper too plain for how much weight it carried. "By vote of member worlds," she said, voice steady as a lead line, "the Alliance of Harbors recognizes the Karu as partners in stewardship of the Circle. We swear the harbor oath. Our strength is for shelter. We will not turn away." She stepped down into a crush of arms and fins and laughter. Tide wrote a simple braid of gold and rose, family, and Ebb added a mossy green home like a benediction. Hale slipped out to the pier. His reflection came up to meet him in the dark water. A tired man, boots scarred, shoulders looser than they'd been a year ago. He thought about Dunkirk's little boats and Berlin's flour sacks, about Navajo code talkers and kids in Sunday shoes. He thought about how humans are at their best when the trick is not cleverness but stubborn love. He touched the rail. "We held," he said to the ship, to himself, to the ordinary miracle of a harbor. Behind him, the hall roared with a new song that would not need translation. The reef answered in color, cobalt, saffron, pearl, long chords that said the weather would change, and they would, too, and that it would be all right because they'd change together. The tide turned. It always does.